Hey, welcome to another show of the Raul Reyes Show. Here it's Friday, about 7 o'clock, right on the dot. Usually we're on Tuesdays and occasionally some parts of the weekdays, and a lot of it has to do with sometimes we have special guests. Today we've got Pedro Gonzalez. We're going to bring him on board here real quick, but a lot is going on. But before I do that, please don't forget to shoot this out to all your friends. Share the page. Share if you're watching on Twitter, please share that as well. And of course, we are on the YouTube channel as well. So it's Friday in Texas. A lot going on. We got Chinese blimps and or balloons in the air. Uh, a president who won't act or do anything, and we find ourselves in this sort of this, I want to say, a dark spot just in national security. And so, all that said, lots going on. I wanted to invite Pedro Gonzalez, who's from Chronicles. Let me put this up here. This is his Substack. Just we'll bring him on here in a second. If uh, if you will, we'll put this back up when he's done. Glad to have Pedro on here. If you don't know, I caught on to Pedro back when he was with American Greatness. Then he moved on to Chronicles. Of course, he's got his own Substack now, but I brought him on board because he reminded me of when I first ran for Congress back in 2019. We declared against a guy named Will Hurd, and then subsequently got into a runoff against Tony Gonzalez, the current congressman. And I remember back then when we were running against what I knew was a Democrat, LULAC Democrat plant and a poison pill for the future. And so we were exposing this guy. And I remember a lot of my Republican friends said, "Oh, you're being too negative. You're being too negative." And they always fell back to this, Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment that says, "Thou shalt not tear other Republicans down." And I couldn't understand it because the more you expose the truth, the more it seemed like the Republican, I guess, electeds or key people within our party here in the Republican Party of Texas or even within the county, I could sense that they were a little upset that you were exposing or telling the truth about other Republicans. And fast forward, fast forward to where we are now. What you find is Tony Gonzalez, the congressman, is completely on the opposite side of what's happening on the border, on marriage equality, on all kinds of issues. And I'm just using him as an example and why I invited Pedro on because one of the things that Pedro Gonzalez is doing is he's actually talking truth about what's happening in our current politic environment, and it's got a lot to do with Donald Trump. And so what I've seen is as soon as he puts some truth out, people tend to attack him for almost being anti-Trump, which I don't believe me. This is just like what I was doing back when I was running for Congress. We have to expose people in our own tent, or else, guess what? Leftist liberals have figured out how not just they figured out how to not just run as Democrats but also as Republicans. And so to that end, so I don't get too carried away here, the goal here is I wanted to bring Pedro. I'd like to talk about other stuff like Ukraine. He's written some great, just articles. Again, follow him on the Substack Contra. We'll put it back up there. But if you will help me welcome Pedro Gonzalez from Chronicles and of course Contra Substack. There, Pedro, how are you today?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me, bro.
Super. Um, I want to get right into it. You sort of heard the monologue. You and I were talking earlier. One of the things that I can't understand right now is as a Trumpist, I guess, Trump supporter, a MAGA proponent, and now looks like I'm devolving to America first because what I've seen is the guy that I really, cheerleadered for, and I wanted him to win in 2020, Donald Trump. He's hanging out with some people that make me kind of wonder what's happening. One of them is Lindsey Graham, and we know him around here as Lindsey Grahamnesty because he's all about amnesty. Here lately, he's been touting more weapons and F-16s to, of all places, Ukraine. So he's obviously a neocon. And then you look at what Trump did with Ronna McDaniel, and most people don't know that he was actually pushing Ronna McDaniel from the backside because you had Mike Lindell and a few other folks in there. Harmeet. What's her
Yes,
last name?
very
I just
cool.
lost it. But these are all great patriots. But he went with Ronna McDaniel, who has failed in every aspect about how we win elections. And then the one that really got me was uh, Kevin McCarthy. I see Marjorie Taylor Greene with the phone screaming at
Yeah,
Gates and them, and it looks like she's holding Donald Trump on the line,
yeah.
trying to get them to tell to vote for Kevin McCarthy. The question is, what is happening with the Trump base? Do you see them falling apart, falling away from Trump based on this, or is there not enough people who understand that this is sort of what you're doing? You're telling folks this is what's happening with Trump. What say you?
Well, going back to that very tired Reagan platitude about an 80% friend is not a 20% enemy, well, it doesn't matter if the 20% is actually what it matters. You know what I'm saying? If the 80% is really trivial, if the 80% is the easy stuff, but then on the 20%, it's consistently the things that really make or break everything, then that's actually an enemy. That's not a friend. That's at best that's a fair weather friend or a summer soldier, right? Which is not what we need right now. Or a
Right,
sunshine patriots and summer soldiers. No, I really despise that whole 80-20 thing because again, it tells you that that person's mind is oriented toward quantity instead of quality, the things that don't matter versus the things that do matter. And I think that really, in a nutshell, sums up people like Lindsey Graham. On the things that matter, on the issues that are really important to us, they will always consistently stab you in the back or find some way of working their influence to dilute policies that are actually consistent with the America First mandate. And so it's difficult to know what exactly is happening in the minds of Trump supporters in the sense that a lot of the attempts to kind of paper over this stuff, "Oh, it's fine that Trump endorsed Lindsey Graham," which he did at his rally in
right,
South Carolina. He full-throatedly endorsed him. He said he's a good guy and a good politician. Lindsey Graham is neither. And it's fine that Trump's top lieutenant, Susie Wiles, who runs his fundraising operations. If you don't know who Susie Wiles is, she is essentially the gatekeeper at Mar-a-Lago. If you want to get an endorsement from Trump, you have to go through Susie Wiles. She runs his Save America leadership pack. She runs his fundraising operations. She's not some low-level foot soldier. She is a major player. Trump entrusts her with running his world, basically.
right,
And during that whole fight over Ronna Romney McDaniel running the RNC, Susie Wiles was openly attacking Trump supporters, namely Harmeet Dillon and Mike Lindell, basically saying that the criticism that's coming, she didn't name names in her statement to the Associated Press, but it's very obvious who she was talking about because it was Dillon and Lindell who were holding over Harmeet, not just her terrible record of being basically a failure
right,
uh, by any reasonable standard, but also how she had been mismanaging RNC funds, how she'd been mismanaging your money that you give to the RNC, right? And Susie Wiles, this top lieutenant in Trump world, is out in the public saying it's a lie. Anybody who's making these claims is misleading people, and then Trump is being silent. He's not, because again, Susie Wiles is basically on Trump's leash, or at least you think she would be, so he could pull her back at any moment and tell her stop attacking these people or whatever. Nothing. And actions speak louder than words, right? So it does seem like there's a sizable part of the Trump base that is very, very much still pro-Trump, very much still attached to him, but they have these questions that are just gnawing at them. And the problem is nobody who has a huge platform really wants to ask them. Thankfully, you do have guys like Tucker Carlson and
yeah,
Charlie Kirk who are asking these questions. And I actually just did both of those shows. It was on Tucker Carlson, I think on Wednesday, and I was on Charlie Kirk today. And we talked about this issue, but they're really the only two people that I can think of with massive platforms who are even asking these questions. And these are questions that matter most importantly and above all to the American voting base that
yeah.
supports the concept of America first.
Well, so to that end, because and I mentioned it earlier, during the time that the 20 Patriots were trying to keep Kevin McCarthy from,
Yeah.
I guess, winning the speakership, I think in the process they were trying to win some concessions and change the rules, which is, this is Matt Gaetz, Lauren Berbert, and Chip Roy, our guy here local.
Yeah,
What I could see is the question I asked was sort of the same thing about when Trump gets together with Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy. Is there's supposed to be 40 or 50 Freedom Caucus representatives, Republicans. There was a totality of 20 patriots fighting Kevin McCarthy.
yeah,
And so first thing for me as an America first is, where are those 40? What happened to those 40, the extra 20 cats? And by the way, 3 or 4 of the 20 patriots were freshmen, or something. They were brand spanking new, like Anna Paulina, is one from Florida.
yeah,
Fantastic, not to be compared to Representative Salazar, who is pro amnesty out in
yeah,
Florida.
that's
And
right.
so here in Texas, and the folks, I got so many calls, Pedro, going, what in the hell is going
Yeah,
on? And
yep,
why is Trump pushing Kevin McCarthy? And by the way,
yep,
yesterday, I don't know if you saw he put it on Truth Social. They asked Kevin McCarthy, was Ashley,
yeah, I
was she
saw it.
murdered?
Yep,
And he blasts Kevin McCarthy. How do you reconcile that? What
yeah.
the hell is going on there?
Yeah, it was because Kevin McCarthy was asked, "Do you think that Ashley Babbitt was, killed wrongly or what?" And Kevin McCarthy's answer was, "I think the police officer was doing his job." In other words, she deserved to be shot. And then, right, this comes on the heels of Trump's, asking, who shot Ashley Babbitt, and Trump actually called the police officer who shot her a lunatic. He said that that lunatic shot her for no reason, and then, here you go, Kevin saying, actually, she deserved it. And I think that's really it in a nutshell. And again, oh, but Trump blasted Kevin. That doesn't really count for much, does it? When Kevin is still in power. Um, and the thing with the 20 Republicans who stood up to him, this is really important. And I'm actually working on a longer article that's actually going to tie together the fight over the House, the fight over the RNC, and then this Lindsey Graham business. It's going to tie all three things together. And again, my audience is people who support Trump but have questions. And I'm beginning. Uh, it begins with the House thing, and I think this is important because there's been an effort to rewrite history almost as it happened. Oh, no, no, no. Trump was with the 20. He was pressuring Kevin. He was always kind of like mediating, and he was really the guy that made the deal. That's complete nonsense. It took 15 ballots, right, to get everything that these guys wanted out of Kevin McCarthy.
Yeah.
Trump said, stop it after 5.
Eh,
That's just a fact. Like, you can
yeah.
go back and look at his statement. 5 ballots in, Trump said, knock it off. Lauren Boebert said on the floor that Trump called them and told them to knock it off. Those are her words. And then she
Yeah.
said to him, I think Trump is wrong and he should tell Kevin McCarthy to withdraw. So this whole effort to kind of rewrite it and say, no, 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 he was with the 20. No, he wasn't. He absolutely wasn't. And I think Scott Perry said something like, Trump helped make this deal. And maybe at the very, very end, if that's true, but I wouldn't expect Scott Perry to try to go to war with Trump and call him out on that. Like, this is a very precarious position to be in, right? For all of these people, I mean, how awkward is that? For the 20 Republicans to think that Trump is going to be on their side and then decidedly not, and then, yeah, MTG seemingly trying to kind of like almost humiliate, I think it was Rosendale from Montana,
Yeah.
by telling him, "Trump is on the phone for you," and then she tweeted a picture of it, like, almost mocking him.
It
Like, I
was
mean,
kind of
that's
stupid, Pedro. I mean, I have to tell you, for a long time, I'm an MTG fan because she's out there, and they threw her out of all the committees. And I got to tell you, I lost all favor just because I thought this lady went to licking the boots of Kevin McCarthy uh, during this 14 votes or 15 votes. But here, so let me segue because for just a little bit here, because that was kind of an eye opening on the floor. I look at 20 additional Republicans that say their Freedom Caucus were nowhere to be found. There's 20 poor souls trying to take on what I think is the rhino establishment in Congress. They embarrassed the heck out of Kevin McCarthy for sure. I was loving every minute of it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks were too, up until you realize Trump is on board to keep him. But here's the one that surprised me, but I'm looking at Mark Levin throw down for
Yeah.
these for Kevin. This is
Yeah.
Mr. By the way, I'm telling you, I woke up and I had a Bill Kristol moment. Remember National Review? These were the original, I guess, conservative Republicans, and they brought you George Bush and everybody else and their grandmother. I was reading these folks in the '90s and the early 2000s because I really believe that this was conservative. And then you wake up and these people literally took us to Iraq and all these other places because we wouldn't ask the question, and we all sort of befell to the Ronald Reagan 11th commandment, hey, don't question anything. So we find ourselves doing that with Donald Trump, right? Because we all are supposed to hate Kevin McCarthy. Right after January 6th, Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy literally lambaste Trump for being at fault for the insurrection, right?
Yep. That's right.
And then here he is trying to save him. We were just, it's dumbfounded. And then
Yeah.
I look at Hannity. I stopped listening to that guy a long time ago, but you had all these political pundits that just literally went the other way.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by
Yeah.
that, or you okay? Give me
No.
what do you? Yeah, I
But
want
I
to know what you, because you're the only one I could see going. Hey, folks, this is how it is. And now Tucker Carlson, got you.
Mhm.
Steve
Yeah.
Bannon was somewhere in there looking. He was okay still, but really the surprising ones was Mark Levin and a few other cats out there. I was just
Yeah.
cra-
Yeah.
crazy. What are your thoughts?
No, I wasn't surprised, but I think it's because my indoctrination, let's use that word, my indoctrination into the right, because I wasn't always, politically active as a right-wing person. Um, it came through actually reading about the old fights between the basically the new right, I guess you could call it, in the establishment. So basically, the Buchanan Revolution, like that was really my introduction to right wing politics. Was reading about the Buchanan Revolution and what Buchanan tried to do and what he stood for. And so basically being really familiar with how, the establishment tried to destroy Buchanan and tried to slander him and stuff. I mean, it's I think that is probably why I'm not surprised whenever stuff like this happens. But no, it was you're totally right. It was actually, and it's actually much worse. Again, it's incredible. Our politics really endorse, or not endorse, induce forgetfulness. There's this in Greek mythology, there's this river that flows in Hades, and I think it's called the Lethe, if I'm
Okay,
pronouncing it correctly. But it's a river that the dead drink from when they arrive at Hades, and it wipes their memory of their life.
what's the name of this river? I'm sorry, one more time.
It's Lethe. I think it's pronounced Lethe. But
Okay,
the point is that our politics induce forgetfulness like that river. Like within 24 hours, your memory is just wiped. So it's actually much worse than people remember. Brian Kilmeade called
oh my
them
lord,
insurrectionists, and then he was corrected, and he settled for, I think, idiots instead.
wow.
Or he wasn't corrected. He used the term insurrectionist, and then he kind of realized, "Oh, no, I used the word insurrectionist to describe the 20 Republicans that are standing up to Kevin McCarthy," and he
Yeah,
was like, "Oh, no, no," and then somebody said something else, and then Kilmeade agreed with them, but it was, like, not much better. It was, I think, idiots or something like that. So Brian Kilmeade on Fox calls them insurrectionists. Dan Crenshaw called them
oh
terrorists.
man.
MTG, people miss this. MTG said these 20 Republicans are holding the country hostage. Who takes hostages?
Jeez,
Terrorists. Yeah.
these are
Laura,
Republicans, Pedro. These are
yes,
Republicans.
yes,
It's
that's right. Yeah. And then Laura Ingraham tried to make Matt Gaetz look stupid on her show. And I think Gaetz and Hannity both did this, but Laura did it in a really drawn out way where she basically said, "Hey, Matt, Trump disagrees with you. Are you saying that you disagree with Trump on Kevin McCarthy?" And then Matt gave an answer. And then Laura asked him again, "So you disagree with Trump?" And then Matt said, "On this issue, yes." And it was a moment where she was basically trying to use Trump to shame Gates on national television for his position on McCarthy.
yeah.
It was really nasty. And Hannity like trampled Lauren Boebert
Yeah,
on his
that
show.
that one, Pedro, I think that one was the most disgusting. Because if you look
Yeah.
at, Representative Boebert, I mean, she's got like 5 kids, so she's a strong woman out there in
Yeah,
Congress fighting. She just had barely won,
yep,
her
yep,
race, and here is Hannity just berating her and trying to belittle her. I mean,
yep. It was so bad. And then what does Haney do after that? He has Gates and Boebert on, and he actually has the audacity to say, "Look, I was an objective guy throughout this whole thing. I was
no,
just doing my job. I was on your side the whole time."
hell
And
no,
it's just
brother. I don't
ridiculous.
think so.
No, no, it's terrible.
Well, for me, because and again, look, you've been on interviews and podcasts with a lot of folks. I barely jumped in at 2019 after a guy named Will Hurd because he just ticked me off about the border. But for but I've been reading politics, and like every other person, I've been paying attention to the Bill Crystals, the Karl Rose. The security was the big issue for George W. Bush in his
Yeah,
second campaign, and we're gonna fight the extremists, and we wake up and realize we've sort of been, I don't know if gaslit is the right word. We've been taken through the river of Leith, and we forget about all the other stuff because we want to win as Republicans, only to wake up and I want to take you to Texas for a second because Republicans, oh my, let me just grab a hold of myself before I just lose it here. But in about 2 years ago, as I attended some of these, what they call the Senate Republican executive committees, wonderful people, Pedro, are trying to put policy together. They hand it over to the elected Republicans in the, legislative body. This is 2 years ago, and they wipe their nalgas with it. You understand? I'm like, okay.
yeah,
So then everybody walks out of there, says, "This is the most conservative session ever." So here we are now in the 88th legislative session. Good people have put policy. There's only like 8 priorities for Texas. One of them, by the way, is no Democrat, no Democrats in key chair positions. And what do they first do? Bam! It's now back to normal. I think the base, like what they're seeing with Trump and MAGA, and what was originally what is conservative Inc. People are
yep,
waking up here in Texas. I think we realize a lot of these Republicans, they're not conservative. I think, and I know you wrote an article. Matt Rinaldi was on the front page there. What are your thoughts there? Because we're having the same problem here. People think Texas is it's Republican, but it's not conservative. We can't secure the border,
yep,
gender mutilation, LGBT, on and on and on.
yeah,
We can't solve this problem in 19 years of Republican
yeah,
leadership.
yeah. I think the title of that article, because I've written several articles about Texas because
The
Texas is
Rainbow Republicans.
right, yeah. I wrote another one, it was called the Potemkin Village of Texas conservatism, something along those lines, and what I mean by that is that there's this whole, idea of Texas as this kind of red bastion, and even guys like Peter Thiel will say, "The future of America is either the California model or the Texas model." And in my mind, I'm like, they're not that different, actually. Texas has a lot of
Nope.
the same problems as California. You just happen to have, Republicans like Dan Crenshaw that are basically providing the window dressing, but it's ultimately tending in the same direction as California.
Yeah.
But you don't know that unless you are, hip to what's going on on the state level and you're plugged into the actual politics on the ground. And then you realize, like you said, this is a Republican state, but it's not actually that conservative in terms of its politics. And there's actually what makes it so frustrating is there's a very active activist base in Texas.
Yep.
I one of the first times I did a speaking event before I had a proper fitting dress shirt even was actually in Texas. The True Texas Project flew me out,
Oh yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and I spoke with them, and my talk was actually about the failures of three so-called Republican revolutions: the Reagan Revolution, the Gingrich Revolution, and then the Trump Revolution. And what I meant by that was not like it was obviously that's for some people that's considered controversial, but what I was trying to show them is, look, just because you've got Reagan in office, or just because you've got the Gingrich Revolution, or just because you have Trump in office, doesn't mean you're actually getting a conservative policy. That's why it's so important to have an activist base. and obviously you do in Texas, but still you have tremendous amounts of pushback from basically just the institutional GOP machine, which is actually mostly just exists to protect itself from challenges.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and in some of your articles, you've made a great point that the Democrat Party has institutionalized its system about how it rolls through policy and how they take care of stuff. At the grassroots level for Republicans, we don't seem to have that, except that if you're part of the Rhino Club, they seem to be able to reelect themselves or puppets that sort of fill in the holes, like in our case. I mean, here I was, a lieutenant colonel, retired from the border, mind you, from Del Rio, Texas, and spitting out all the conservative because they're true to who I am. And for us, because I grew up in a very Del Rio's a wonderful place, by the way, but we saw our textile industry like Wranglers and Levi's
you
literally
know,
leave in the late 80s, early 90s. So, my mother used to work there, and a lot of her friends, they all rolled in one day and it's got pink slips. And guess what? It went to Thailand, it went to Korea, it went everywhere. So when I come home looking like I'm going to go rebase myself in a place like Del Rio, there's no technology, there's no real industry. You actually could work at Laughlin Air Force Base, but somebody has to die there so I can go get a job. You understand? And so, as funny as that seems, the reality is for us, we wanted to reindustrialize America in these
yeah.
places. So when I hear a guy like Donald Trump, we're drafted to him, and so is all of South Texas, and of course the rest of America. That's how he gets 80 million votes come out in the last election, but somehow he loses. So to me, when I see what's happening, his getting together with Kevin McCarthy, it just blows my mind. So the question now is he ran a populist campaign in 2016, but he really didn't govern like that. Am I right or am I wrong?
No, you're right, and, again, going back to the theme of forgetfulness, people have forgotten that the most popular policy proposal that Trump had going into the White House in 2017 was infrastructure. Trump had been talking about a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Why does that appeal to people? Well, because you're literally talking about reindustrializing America, about making America great again in a
Yeah.
very literal physical sense, rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our dams, and bringing and some enormous works project like that obviously also entails jobs and manufacturing. Like it's very clear why something that ambitious would appeal to people, to voters, to Americans across the political spectrum, right? Because we all want a country that actually works and jobs and all those things. Well, you didn't get that. Instead, you got infrastructure weak. Why? Because Paul Ryan's people and
Well,
Trump's people convinced Trump that instead we're going to do the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's a very controversial piece of policy. There's a lot of debate over basically did it incentivize offshoring? Did it actually do what Trump says it did in terms of alleviating the tax burden and things like that and putting more money in your pocket. I mean, that's a whole debate that's still ongoing about that. It's not as settled as people think. And like I said, the big question is whether or not it incentivized offshoring. And there is some evidence to suggest it did. But the point is that, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. The point is that the this is totally forgotten. Two people were really key in passing that proposal. One was Paul Ryan.
yeah,
There's a very good article by Peter Beinart, and he says that basically Paul Ryan had been waiting like 30 years to do something like this. And it was only when Trump became president that he got to get it done, which should tell you that if Paul Ryan wanted to do it, you should probably take a closer look at it because probably it's not all it's cracked up to be by conservatives.
right.
And the other person who was instrumental in passing it was Gary Cohn. Who's that? Gary Cohn was an executive at Goldman Sachs. He was also one of the first people that congratulated Biden when he won. So, yeah, again, um, the point is that Trump ran on this really populist platform, and the infrastructure thing I think was really indicative of that. And it was not a good sign when you didn't get infrastructure and instead you got infrastructure weak, which is kind of a It's like, look at all the things that we could do.
Well,
What we
and they
do.
also passed what was that, oh, they reduction in jail times, and that was it.
Yeah, yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, this is why I don't wanna be the guy that's, coming on people's shows
But
to
you
tell
are,
people.
but you are.
Right, yeah, but I have to be because nobody else keeps track of it, and sometimes
Right.
it's like, I feel like I'm going crazy, but, like when Trump said recently, like, "I think we should, put drug dealers to death." You freed them. With the First Step Act literally freed
Yeah,
them.
instead of doing the infrastructure bill, they did this other
Yes,
bill that you would typically see Democrats pass,
yes, yes. I think this is really important. That proposal was really it actually, I'm sorry to say, it actually has its origins in Texas
Yep,
because that proposal got into the White House in part with the help of people who came from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, namely Brooke Rollins, who ended up working in basically in Trump's policy shop and then connected with Jared Kushner and basically push this thing as like one of the signature accomplishments of the Trump administration. But if you don't know about TPPF, it's funded by the Kochs, and there's very little difference between what the Kochs want in terms of criminal justice reform and what George Soros wants. It
yep.
just happens to be the case that Soros backs Democrats and the Kochs typically back Republicans, but on crime, they're actually very similar. So,
Well, and, I got a little cross-eyed with TPPF because, um, they've got the Libra initiative that is part of that whole group,
yeah,
and in fact, up until the November election, this past November, you had these like Myra Flores, down in South Texas was they were having these what they call a charla, which is essentially a chat for the most part. It's just
right,
another Spanish word for chat, and they would do it on kind of like we're doing here, and they'd have groups but those were the Libre Initiative. Most people don't know talks
yes,
really really conservative, but their
yep,
goal is amnesty, and
yep, that's
so
right,
let's kind of go to South Texas here for a second because the two out of the three ladies down there. Lost. And what I was saying from the get go, it goes back to exposing these things is Myra Flores, for as wonderful of a candidate you think she might be, she was pro amnesty,
yep,
and so now Cassie Garcia just couldn't beat Henry Cuellar down there because for whatever reason I thought she was the most conservative of all of them. But Monica de la Cruz, who actually did win, in fact they call her Monica de la Crenshaw because she acts just like Crenshaw. And of course, you saw her. She wasn't part of the 20, beating up on Kevin. He had just funded all her campaign. The point here is there was no Hispanic red wave. Now you can blame Ronna McDaniel. And I mean, but the reason is some of this is when you've got Republican candidates talking about amnesty.
yeah,
We look, we're middle class. I'm a first generation. My dad was from Mexico. Why in the hell would we want amnesty? We're barely crawling into and out of the middle class, trying to, get to a different point and you're going to inundate it with a lot of illegal aliens. Anyway, back to you. My question is: are you seeing that connection where the RNC doesn't even reach down into forget grassroots. It can't even talk to some of its base because it doesn't know how to do it at all.
no, no, they're totally out of touch. I mean, remember that I think in the last year or two, Ronna McDaniel announced this is her big initiative. Do you remember what it was? The RNC Pride Coalition.
Oh
It
yeah,
was yes, it was at Mar-a-Lago, and Ronna announced that the RNC was going to, invest more resources in this initiative, for LGBTQ outreach.
yeah,
And Rick Grinnell was there, and he talked about how he remembers when during the Pat Buchanan days that the GOP was not very friendly to the LGBTQ, camp. But those days have changed, kind of saying we've overcome them, the Buchananites, which I thought was like, wow, that's really alarming because a lot of people argued, and
yeah,
correctly, I think, that Trump in 2016 was kind of like a vindication of Pat Buchanan and his
yeah,
America First movement. Very similar platforms. There was this article in Politico, and I think the headline was like, Pat Buchanan's ideas made it, but he didn't, or something like that. It was like a quote from him. And it was people correctly connected the two things. So to hear Rick Grinnell in the last year or two say, yeah, we overcame these guys, and kind of like we won, and now the fruits of that victory are the RNC Pride Coalition. But this is actually a very good sign. The reaction to it was pretty scathing. Like I was told by people who are RNC committee members that the conservative ones were like furious about it. They said that Rana basically ambushed them, that it was an entirely top down thing. You think that she's out of touch with the grassroots and the average voter? Rana did not even like clear this with committee members. They said it was entirely her idea, and then when it happened, she tried to play it off as like, oh, I thought I had communicated everything well, and I'm so surprised that you guys didn't take this as well as I thought you would. I'm so sorry. And they obviously said it was nonsense, that she knew exactly what she was doing. But yeah, it's difficult to think of a more out of touch institution than the establishment GOP and its organs like the RNC.
Well, let me tell you, Pedro, I think we're in trouble in 2024 because they couldn't connect during a time where we're supposed to have, just call it a red wave. But for me, they were gaslighting the Latino vote or Hispanic vote, whichever one you want to use, by, oh, they're all conservative. We All of a sudden they woke up and realized Hispanics are conservative, and they really didn't go talk to us until they needed the November vote, and even then they disappeared after that, and there really wasn't a red wave. 2024, what are you seeing? I think we're in trouble if you still have, I mean, we do. We've got Ronna McDaniel, who is not going to do anything different. Kevin McCarthy, who, unless Trump, like he did yesterday, where he tongue lashes him because he didn't call the cop who killed Ashley Babbitt a murderer, uh, sort of whiplashes him around. He's going to keep looking for folks like Wesley Hunt, who just won in Houston, who's about as a rhino as you can get. Tony Gonzalez, right here in our district, who's about as rhino as you can get. These people aren't going to change their stripes, even though Trump is backing them or kept them in place, right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, you can't drain the swamp by surrounding yourself with swamp creatures and putting them in charge.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you can go I was actually just kind of, like, mentally going over this endless cycle of Trump, denouncing the cop that shoots Ashley Babbitt, Kevin McCarthy defending him, and then Trump denouncing Kevin McCarthy and the cop that
Listen,
shoots Ash and
it's
it's gonna and I'm sure at some point it's gonna happen again, like, the
Yeah, it's
cycle will
hard not to laugh at it
yeah,
because you're like, "What in the hell?"
yeah,
So imagine, and you and I are a little. I don't profess to be anywhere at your level or some other folks, but I try to capture what the heck is happening. Can you imagine all the other folks? And I see some of the Republican base who really still love Trump. I'm still a fan. That doesn't mean I'm going to go to DeSantis right away. I mean, because I, I see Karl Rove hanging with that guy and doing some things. What I am uh, thrilled is that folks like you are actually saying some of the things we're asking. What
yeah,
is going on here, and do we even have a chance in 2024? Because um, I mean, they've done a poor job in what's supposed to be this big red wave. They totally
yeah.
just smashed it.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
know, Pedro.
I think and I wasn't I said before somewhere that I was not demoralized because I didn't think that there was really gonna be a red wave. Um, I because sometimes I have to kind of check myself to make sure that I'm not just being a crank. So I asked my friends who are plugged
Party pooper.
into yeah, that's right. So I checked my friends who are, very, very much plugged into to the GOP scene, and I asked them ahead of midterms, "Is it just me or does the GOP not have an actual platform or a governing vision?" And the answer I got was, "Yes, they absolutely don't. They don't."
Yeah,
And then, like,
Democrats are bad was good enough, I
yeah,
think.
right, yeah, yeah, that's yeah. Turns out that's not actually a governing vision, but I remember I sat down one night and I was, like, trying to find, like, just like statements, like GOP policy for midterms or whatever. I don't remember what the query was, but one of the first things and only things that came up was Kevin McCarthy saying, "If we win, we're going to go after Social Security," and it's just like, wow,
That's
that
old people are gonna really love you for
yeah,
that, Kevin.
yeah, yes, that's right, yeah, and that was really like the only thing I could find, and so yeah, I mean, going into midterms, I was maybe one of the only people that did not think it was gonna go that great, and when it didn't happen, just like I wasn't devastated or surprised, and I guess in a way, it's just I'm thinking to myself like, well, Um, when your team is the Washington Generals, are you really surprised when they lose to the Globetrotters, you know? Like, so,
Well,
yeah.
here and we were doing rallies on the border back when Biden took over. The reason, and we're gonna pat ourselves on the back, the reason that Abbott actually finally goes to a place like Del Rio and says, "We're gonna build a wall and we're gonna arrest everybody," was we had done a series of rallies, and not all by myself, a guy named Frank Lopez and a few other folks from this area, because we didn't like what was happening on the border. Uh, but what I'll tell you is we consistently, even up to the November election this past November, we were like you. There's no energy out here.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, we don't like Democrats, but I had people calling me, Raul, you got to convince people, your Hispanic friends, to go vote Republican. I'm like, for Tony Gonzalez?
Yeah,
Are
for what?
you are
Yeah.
you kidding me?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Dan Crenshaw, I mean, and
yeah,
old Mitch McConnell stabs us in the back. He runs over Kevin McCarthy like it's just a minor speed bump, and $1.7 trillion, poof, right out the door.
yeah,
Pedro, this is nuts. I mean, it's crazy.
yeah. No, I think it's really, again, I hate to be that guy, but, you bring up Karl Rove, and this, by the way, I have no idea if DeSantis is running. I actually really have I've publicly said several times I hope he doesn't, in particular because
That he does
I think
not.
that he waits until 2028, um, because I just think that if he runs now, it's gonna turn into such a like a blood sport,
Yeah.
that I think the only person that could possibly benefit from it is probably Biden. If
Well,
basically if the right just blows each other up. And, like, look, the thing is again, I don't regardless of what Team Trump says on social media,
yeah,
because they have a lot of they have, like, an army of paid influencers. Some people say DeSantis is too, but I think Team's Trump operation is at least on social media, it's much more active and sophisticated. Um, they're convinced he's running. I haven't seen any evidence of that. In fact, I think the silence is not because they're like, they're waiting for the right moment. I think it's actually because if he is actually considering a run, they don't know if it's now or in 2028. And so, like the Karl Rove thing, Karl Rove was advising Brad Parscale, the guy that was
yeah,
instrumental to Trump's campaign. Like you look at the people that were terrible for Trump's reelection,
yeah,
and then the people that were in charge of that whole thing was a complete disaster, by the way. Another thing that's been totally memory hold, the fact that the Trump team pulled funding for advertising in, like, key states, some of which they actually ended up losing, and you can say, okay, that there was fraud, and I wrote about fraud.
yeah,
I actually wrote an article about, like, verifiable instances of fraud, or at least, anomalies, and my article got Ned Ryan, who's a GOP guy,
yeah,
he tweeted my article out, and then Trump actually retweeted it. And I was told by the White House staffers that my article was one of the first things that they could actually read and say, like, okay, these are things that we've actually can prove are like weird or wrong or something like that.
right.
So I'm just telling you this, like I'm not like
No,
a
uh,
yeah.
all I can say is that I hope you're right, because people are still fans of Donald Trump, and they like the blood sport, and he's already going after him.
Yeah.
And look, the concern of mine is some of these uh, Bill Crystal types are on the backside of
Yeah.
DeSantis. At least it looks like it. So that's why people
Yeah.
are sort of staying away from him, but they still can't understand why Trump is hanging out with Lindsey Graham and some of these other folks. I know you don't like this, but I keep hearing this whole, well, you got to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But I think that's hogwash too, don't you think?
It's it's funny because I had to answer this earlier today too. Um, No, that doesn't it's just not how it's not it almost seems like it's a coordinated thing that people are being encouraged to believe. But it just completely defies reality.
Yeah,
Keep your enemies close, keep your enemies close. It's like, okay, so you keep saying that enemies close, enemies close, enemies close, and you look around, you're like, "Oh, I'm only surrounded by enemies. All
yeah,
the people that are nearest to me are my enemies,
yeah,
every single one of them." And you know what your enemies do? They stab your friends in the back. And
yeah,
so, like, perfect example of this is Kevin McCarthy, right?
yeah,
Let's go back to Kevin. What did Kevin do ahead of the midterms? he sabotaged actual America First candidates.
Yeah.
He sabotaged the political machine around Kevin McCarthy sabotaged the races or at least tried to undermine guys like Anthony
Joe
Sabatini in
Kent in
Florida.
Washington.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe Kent was really what they did to him was disgusting.
He won his
They
primary, right? Tell folks he
yeah,
won his primary,
he
and
did.
then he gets no help in the general. Is that
Yep,
correct?
that's right. And with him, um, they tried to paint him as like a crypto leftist, as
Yeah.
basically like a secret Bernie Sanders guy. And Joe Kent lost his wife fighting in the
Yeah.
wars that guys like Kevin McCarthy and Bill
Yeah.
Kristol support.
And they had no mercy for him. None.
Yeah, and then I'm supposed to believe that this is a enemies close, no, it's not. It's a complete I'm sorry, but I know that people wanna believe that, but it's just not true.
Yeah,
And
and look, let me
yeah,
tell you once more, Wesley Hunt out there out of Houston, the complete opposite. That guy is a reformed Democrat who finally he lost his he ran in 2020, lost, and then they redistrict the place, and boom, there he's now, he's in Congress, and the guy's a reformed Democrat. I mean, that's all there is. So I'm with you. Look,
yeah,
we got about 10, 12 minutes. I want to talk briefly about Ukraine. Um, it's a complete mess. If I look at what's his name? Oh, John Mearsheimer. He's
yeah,
brainiac guy. He wrote a wonderful article. It's got a hour-long video, and he
mhm,
says we sort of backed Putin into the wall because uh, we pushed the NAFTA thing, not or NATO thing on Ukraine, and people attacked him and said, "Oh, you're a Putin lover. You're a Putin loyalist or whatever." But he's sort of doing what you're doing. He's drawing out the truth about what's really happening because
yeah,
it looks like that's the case. I'm not saying, by the way, for all of you looking, we're not glorifying Putin. What we're saying is we've got Biden, which is not a really good guy, and his son, who sort of has run corruption gamuts on all kinds of things in Ukraine, and a guy named Putin who they can't control essentially, I think. And so we're in Ukraine because we have to have them in NATO, but there's a whole lot in play here, isn't there? There's more to this than just
yeah. The first thing I'll say is anybody who has suspicions about, this not all being, what you're led to believe, you're totally on the right side here. Um, George Kennan is the guy who is famous for writing, I think it's called The Long Telegram. And basically, he had warned the United States that basically we don't understand the Soviet Union and that we need to change our approach to containing communism and stuff like that. And so I'm saying this because Kennan was no he was not soft on communism. That's the bottom line. And he's considered like one of the main exponents of containment policy, containing the Soviet Union, right?
right.
So his anti-communist credentials are impeccable. Well, when the wall after the wall came down, Kennan noticed that the United States foreign policy establishment, Washington, D.C., was not changing its approach to Russia. And Kennan said, "We are turning our back on the people that just staged the greatest bloodless revolution in history by deciding to quit communism. We're turning our backs on them." That's what anti-communist Kennan said. The DC is kind of putting us on track for disaster. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote Gulag Archipelago, said the same thing that basically the West was trying to use NATO under the cover of spreading democracy and protecting democracy to basically antagonize Russia and basically putting us on track for some kind of a horrible conflict with Russia. Henry Kissinger, who
Yeah.
no one would call a dove, said the same thing twice. That the United States' insistence on pressing east with NATO was going to be disastrous. And in particular, he said like trying to use Ukraine as a kind of proxy against Russia was going to lead to disaster. Again, all of that stuff has been completely memory hold. But my friend Sergei Triskevich, my colleague at Chronicles, he's our foreign affairs editor. He put it really well. He said, Russia started the war, but the United States, by which he means the establishment, DC,
Yeah.
willed it to happen, created the conditions that made it inevitable. And I'll say one more thing here, going back to uh, Lindsey Grahamnesty. In 2014 and 2015, there was ceasefire agreements that were signed between Russia and Ukraine. Long
Hmm.
story short, fighting had broken out in eastern Ukraine between pro-Russian people in eastern Ukraine and the Ukrainian forces. And so the United States and others tried to mediate peace. The second ceasefire was signed in 2015. It was called Minsk II. A year after it's signed, Lindsey Graham is in Ukraine at a military base surrounded by Ukrainian soldiers saying 2017 is going to be the year of offense. So Russia and Ukraine have a peace agreement, and we're trying to make this thing work, or at least we should try to make it work. And Lindsey Graham is in Ukraine 1 year after it's signed, saying we're going on offense, Ukraine, and we're going to give you the weapons that you need. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and he's doing that now. I
yeah,
mean, and this coming from the guy, was supported by, you know, I'm still a fan of Trump, but who really didn't start any skirmishes or anything. So there's just such a collide of values, morals, and principles here. It's not even funny. As a retired lieutenant colonel, I can assure you in my studies, not that I'm letting out any secret squirrel stuff here, but we know what the national vital interest areas are. Ukraine, folks, it was never,
yeah,
never a vital interest to the United States ever. Now, and look, the beauty about Twitter now, Pedro, is that under Elon Musk, we seem to be getting a lot of information that was sort of pigeonholed or story holed somewhere, or just out, just thrown out because of all the censorship and stuff. And we're starting to see that Ukraine seems to be like a haven for biolabs, by which Hunter Biden is a part of the board of all these things. So I guess the point here is it might have not been a national vital interest to America per se, our policy, foreign policy, but it seems to be a vital interest to the Biden family, which is another crazy thing because we just raided Trump's house, but we haven't even laid a hand on the Biden family, who is up to their eyeballs in corruption, and probably the reason I mean, I know we're in Ukraine, but it seems to be this whole something else is happening in Ukraine that has led the Biden family, not America, to almost put us on the brink of World War III, actually.
Ukraine has always been a nexus of corruption. I know that you're told today that it's like a paragon of democracy, but no, Ukraine has always been a black hole of corruption and international intrigue. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was published in 2015, and it talks about I think it's the Clinton Foundation. Um, because there's like the Clinton Global Initiative, there's a Clinton Foundation. It focuses specifically, I believe, on donations to the Clinton Foundation. And
Right.
what this analysis by the Wall Street Journal found was that the top source of foreign contributions to the Clinton Foundation were coming from Ukraine. So it's always been a kind of haven for skullduggery, for corruption, for, bad money. It's always been that way. And before the war, like right before the war, Zelensky was telling the World Economic Forum and its members that he wanted them to view Ukraine as like their number one investment haven. Like, come hide your money here, basically. Uh, and again, people have totally forgotten this. And Zelensky himself was actually he ran as an anti-corruption politician, and then very quickly lost favor with his own constituents because, surprise, he was extremely corrupt, perhaps even more corrupt than his predecessors, who were all corrupt themselves. But he was especially bad in particular because he said, "I'm going to fight corruption." And he actually ended up being, just as corrupt, if not more so. So it's always been that way.
Well, and his backer with all the money, Shklomsky or whatever
Zelensky, yeah,
he's the banker guy, and that guy's been in trouble with America. He had a "no, don't come to America" kinda status thing, but he's
yeah,
behind a whole lot of corruption and money laundering and embezzlement by which billions of dollars have just been lost, and, so here we are. If we sent 50 billion in the beginning, and of all people, Republicans are backing this. I mean, it must be the neocons. Certainly, our congressman here, Tony Gonzalez, was in line to vote for that. But
yeah.
I don't know. We've sent over 100 billion. We can't protect our own southern border, and it looks like we have no national air defense because China's flying balloons clear across America. Pedro, I mean, we're in trouble here. Ukraine looks like most people don't realize it. You tell me if I'm wrong, but we are closest we've ever been to a nuclear holocaust because you can only back up a guy like Putin for so long, and then of course he's run into the arms of China. That doesn't that doesn't help us at all. And what I know is all the other countries who were, I don't know about loyal to America, but were certainly working with us, are now looking at America under the Biden administration regime, saying we can't trust those cats, so we're going to sort of go back to Russia and China because true, Putin has reinforced his, his economy with China and everybody, to include India. India, by the way, straddles China and Russia because, and they're a friend of America, but they haven't condemned that I know of Russia. They sort of said, hey, look, guys, knock it off. But he didn't. The India is sort of, and that's a big country. They're sort of with us, but not against Russia either. I mean, it's a mess out there, Pedro. I think we're the closest we've ever been to a nuclear holocaust. Because at what point does Putin say enough is enough?
Yeah. Yeah, I that's it, I try not to be an alarmist because,
Yeah,
it doesn't help, but
I'll
yeah,
do
I
it.
mean, no, the reality is that the threat of nuclear war has not been this high
Yeah,
in decades, and it's because, again, I think I know we're running out of time here, but I think the interesting thing is, this is not I'm not saying this to, as a kind of compliment to Putin, but what has been interesting about this war is that Putin has actually, it seems to me like he's less insane than the people in Washington, D.C. Because here's the thing is for Putin, nuclear war is a last resort to an existential threat, right? Basically, he's been pushed too far, he's been provoked too much. The United States has helped Ukraine too much to the point where it's now officially, directly involved or whatever.
yeah,
And in that hypothetical scenario, Putin reacts with a nuclear retaliation, right? But DC has already they decided before this war began, we're willing to take that risk, you know, like they are.
yeah,
In foreign policy is a very important foreign policy journal called Foreign Policy. There was an article by a professor, I think he's at Georgetown. His name is Matthew Kronig. He used to be a CIA officer, and I actually had like a debate with him randomly here in Ohio. He showed up at a local school and we kind of got into it. But anyways, in that article, he actually says the United States needs to be prepared to take on Russia and China in overlapping timeframes, which is a very fancy way of saying we need to be ready to fight both Russia and China at the same time, and also be prepared to use nuclear weapons against both countries. And just insane. That's crazier than Putin. It just like there's no like it's crazy to think that like Hillary Clinton and Anthony Blinken are more mad people than like Putin, but
than Putin.
it's
Well, and you said it right, and I'm gonna reiterate it because people will look at this last part and go, "Hey, Pedro and Raul are all in for Putin." No,
yeah,
we're not. We're not. What we're
yeah,
saying though is you have to look at Biden and company and Clinton. They were perfectly willing to go down this road to get to if they have to go to a
yes,
bigger war scenario. And we're not even hiding it, folks. I mean, we're openly sending tanks that still say US Army on it, and we're gonna put them in Ukraine. I mean,
yeah,
it's not even proxy war. I think this is just an all out war, and at a certain point, it goes bad. America, generally speaking, Pedro, the armed forces, and most people know this is open source, is we can fight on two fronts. And but I can tell you the the, the way things are with the woke military and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I'm not sure we're prepared to fight on one front. And so
yeah,
I hate to say it, and I love the military. I grew up in it, but since the Cold War, and I came in '94, I could see those, grin kind of guys, retiring. Good people coming in, but it just became too liberal. And I think a lot of times conservative soldiers get washed out because they don't want you to be that guy.
yeah.
Last question, and we're going to get out of here. But does uh, Trumpism survive? I mean, knowing what we have with Trump, or we're all just going to, because it looks like we're all adapting over to America first because
Yeah,
it is about America first. That's our mandate. At least that's the one I feel. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but
yeah.
does Trumpism survive at the way we're going? Because this is how we started this conversation earlier.
I think Trumpism is it's only valuable to people like us to the degree that it's consistent with America first. You have to have a mandate that's independent of any one individual. It's great to have a charismatic leader. You know, if Octavian were to show up today, like I would sign up for his legion
Right away.
and join his. Yeah, yeah, right. But still, like you need to have a mandate that's
Yeah.
independent of any individual because if you don't, then the mandate is subsumed by the individual. And then you have no ability to say what is and is not America first. Then America first is basically just whatever Trump does, whether that's endorsing Lindsey Graham or pushing amnesty
Yeah.
or criminal justice reform. That's America first. Why? Well, because this guy said it is. And that's not a good place to be. So I think the distinction between America first and other things is correct. And also America first is older than that. America first was, Buchanan. It was
Yeah.
people before him. So yeah, I think that's right. And you can be pro-Trump and want him to do well and still believe there is a mandate and you have to stick to that.
Yeah. No, I give you, listen, most people forget about Pat Buchanan, and I think he led the way for what is now Trumpism, America First, all the way. But uh, you're right. But his own Republican Party sort of sabotaged him
Yeah.
all the way. And I think in 2016 there was sort of this almost direct correlation between Trump and Trumpism because they all sort of match America first. But here, as we roll into 2024, we're all wondering why he's hanging out with the rhinos. You're right. It needs to be, it's America first all the way. And if the leader sort of goes sideways a little bit, then okay, we're still going to be America first all the way. So, hey, Pedro, listen, absolutely thrilled to have you here, folks. If you're will go check out Contra Substack. He's on Chronicles as well, writes some fantastic articles. He's calling like it is. Pedro, I can't thank you enough. Last 30 seconds. Just tell us where else they can reach you if you want.
Yeah, you can read my column Theory of a Partisan at chroniclesmagazine.org and please do subscribe to my Substack at contra.substack.com. It's just a place where I get to publish analysis and commentary, kind of react to things as they happen. And it's the platform is really, really good. I think it's invaluable for independent, actual political journalism.
Yeah, and this is where we actually get our news now because you're actually doing the real research and reminding people not to go to the River of Leith. Did I say that right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. Hey,
Yeah.
Pedro, thanks a lot. Have a good night. Stay warm out in Ohio, and I hope you feel better with that cold. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good one. All right, folks, there you have it. I'm a total fan of Pedro. He's absolutely fantastic. Go catch him one more time. I'll put this up here. This is his Substack. And as you can see, I wanted to bring him on because what's happening here is we're all watching our fearless leader sort of side with people like you know, uh, Gramnesty, Kevin McCarthy, Ronna McDaniel. And we ought to be able to ask those questions. What's happening without being chastised? Because, hey, this is what we do. If we're going to be America first, we want to make sure that we ask the right questions, or else we're going to all go to the voting booth in the blind. And this is how we end up with folks like Dan Crenshaw and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, and our favorite right here, Rhino, Poison Pill, Tony Gonzalez. So awesome to have him here. Go check him out if you can. All that said, we're going to see you back next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. We may be pre-recording it just because we've got some stuff going on, but you will see a show at 7 o'clock next Tuesday. Everybody have a wonderful Friday night. Thanks for hanging in here. We went over a few minutes. Don't forget, share the podcast. This is us right here. And tell your friends to catch us. We're going to try and get a couple other folks that are really key and interesting and are having these conversations like Pedro, because we want good content so you all can actually think about what's happening. Share the podcast. Have a good night. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.